"You're trespassing," she said. "I'll need you to leave." She said it like she was doing me a favor. I was standing on my own land. The woman fleece vest clipboard, the entitled calm of someone who'd mistaken a HOA badge for a property deed, gestured at the 3 finished cabin structures sitting in Lot 7's clearing. A blue and white vinyl banner stretched across the center one. Maplewood Estates Community Retreat. Members only. The board authorized this. We sent 2 registered letters. Your silence was taken as consent. If you don't leave, I'm calling the non-emergency line. A man near the grill raised his phone, already photographing me. If she'd known whose name was on every deed and timber harvest contract tied to these 40 acres, she would not have said the word trespassing. She would not have said anything at all. I had come over the ridge that morning the same way I had every October for 18 years, at 6:45, boots on gravel, the air still cold enough to see my breath. A routine preseason walk of Lots 7 and 9. Check the stands, walk the clearings, confirm the ground was in order before the contracted work began. I knew this land the way you know a place you've worked with your hands for 2 decades. I knew which rows of Douglas fir were ready and which ones needed another season. I knew the drainage slope of Lot 7's northern clearing by feel. I had bought these 40 acres in 2006, grown commercial timber on a rotation cycle ever since, and walked every inch of them more times than I could number. I came over the ridge and stopped. 3 finished cabin structures were standing in the middle of Lot 7's cleared section, the exact section I had spent 2 seasons prepping for this October's harvest. Real walls, real roofs, windows with curtains in them, lawn chairs arranged in a semicircle beside the center cabin, a propane grill with a full tank hooked up, kids in jackets running between the buildings like they'd been doing it since summer, families eating breakfast on paper plates under that banner. None of it was supposed to exist. I started down the slope. A woman in a fleece vest broke from the group near the grill and moved to cut me off before I reached the clearing floor. Fast practiced, like she'd been watching the ridge. I recognized her, Karen, the HOA board president. I'd seen her name on the 2 letters that had arrived at my mailbox over the summer. Letters so vague about community enhancement of adjacent natural land that my attorney had sent a holding response requesting clarification. Clarification that had apparently never been planned. I told her I owned this land. She smiled, the precise smile of someone who has already decided how a conversation ends. I understand your concern, but this is the Maplewood Estates Community Retreat space now. The board voted on this project 4 months ago. I'm going to need you to leave the premises. I asked to see documentation, a deed, an easement, a recorded instrument from the county, anything with an official stamp on it. She tapped her clipboard once. The board authorized this. That's all the authorization required. The man near the grill still had his phone aimed at me from 20 feet away. Slow and deliberate, like the act of being photographed was supposed to make me nervous. A second board member had positioned himself near the steps of the center cabin, arms folded. Karen reached for her own phone. I want to be very clear with you. If you do not leave this designated community space voluntarily, I will contact the non-emergency line. She paused. Then she said the line she was most proud of. We sent 2 registered letters to your address regarding this project, sir. You never responded. Your silence was taken as consent. This is HOA community property now. She said, sir, the way people say it when they mean the opposite. I understood exactly what she thought the consent theory was worth. I also knew what it was worth the moment anyone pulled a county parcel record, but I didn't say that. I looked at the 3 cabins, instead counted them. 1, 2, 3. All of them sitting in Lot 7's northern clearing, the section specifically designated in my contract with Jake's Timber Services for October's harvest. I looked past them toward Lot 9, still standing in full Douglas fir, untouched for now. I checked my watch, not because I needed the time, just because I needed a moment that wasn't her voice. I didn't answer the consent theory. I didn't raise my voice or reach for my phone. I stood there long enough that she took my silence for the same thing she'd apparently taken my letters for surrender. She turned back toward the family's shoulders, squared, satisfied. The man with the camera finally lowered his phone. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to. The banner caught the morning light through the tree line. Members only. Blue letters on white vinyl stretched across a cabin, sitting on land I had paid county property taxes on since the day I signed the deed in 2006. I walked back up to my truck, sat in the driver's seat, looked at the clearing in the rear-view mirror. The 3 cabins, the banner, the grill. The family's all of it on 40 acres that had never, not for a single hour, belonged to anyone but me. If she'd known whose name was on every deed, every county tax record, and every timber harvest contract tied to this land, and what was already scheduled to happen here on October 14th, she would not have said the word trespassing to me. I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar. I had a phone call to make on Monday morning. It had been on my calendar for 6 months. I want to tell you what that land actually was before I tell you what they tried to turn it into. In 2006, I paid $340,000 for 40 acres of mixed timberland in the county's agricultural zone. The parcel number was 147-B. The deed had my name on it. I registered it with the county as commercial timberland the same week I closed, walked the boundary lines with a surveyor, and started planting Douglas fir seedlings before the month was out. I was 50 years old, newly retired from a career as a commercial forester. I'd spent 30 years managing other people's timber operations across 3 states, and I wanted something that was mine, not a lake cabin, not a golf course membership. 40 acres of working forest on an 11-year rotation cycle, managed the way I knew how to manage it, sold to a regional logging company when the timber was ready. A business that ran on patience and planning and didn't require me to talk to very many people that suited me just fine. For the first 8 years, my nearest neighbors were 2 other agricultural parcels and about 4 miles of county road. Then, a developer bought the land adjacent to my eastern boundary, a 22-acre parcel I had considered purchasing myself, but passed on. He subdivided it, built 96 homes, named it Maplewood Estates. I sold him nothing. My 40 acres were never part of any conversation with any developer, any realtor, or any HOA. County parcel number 1147-B had its own deed, its own tax record, its own commercial agricultural classification, and its own surveyed boundary line, a line that ran along my eastern fence posts and had not moved an inch since 2006. I remember watching the subdivision go up from the ridge, framing first, then roofs, then the sound of lawnmowers where there had only been field grass. Within 2 years, there were 96 families on the other side of my eastern fence. A community pool, a playground, street lamps that made the eastern sky glow faintly orange on clear nights, and a homeowners association which in due course elected Karen as its board president. I found out what kind of board president she was gradually, the way you find things out in a neighborhood through other people's pain. There was the retired couple on Birchwood Lane, both in their 70s, who received $40,000 in cumulative fines over an exterior paint color Karen had decided violated the community aesthetic guidelines. They repainted twice, both times in shades Karen had approved in writing, and were fined anyway. They sold their home at a loss 18 months later. There was the family with 3 kids who were threatened with a lien over a basketball hoop in the driveway. A lien that in some states can escalate into a foreclosure action. They removed the hoop and moved to another county. There were at least 3 other homeowners I would learn about later who had received legal threats serious enough to buy their silence permanently. The HOA, as Karen built it, was not a community organization. It was a machine for manufacturing compliance through the credible threat of financial ruin. And it worked because most people who buy a home and take on a mortgage do not have the stomach for a multi-year legal fight with a board that has access to community dues and no hesitation about spending them. So when 2 letters arrived at my mailbox over the summer, both from Maplewood Estates HOA, both describing something called a community enhancement proposal for adjacent underdeveloped natural land in language so vague it could have meant anything, I forwarded them to my attorney without much alarm. He sent a holding response requesting clarification about the specific parcel referenced, the legal basis for any claimed interest in adjacent private property, and any county approvals obtained. No response ever came. My attorney noted the silence. I noted it. We were both waiting to understand what exactly they thought they were proposing. I found out that Saturday morning on the ridge. What I reconstructed later through Karen's own emails, through the board minutes, through conversations with neighbors who were never told any of this was happening, was that the board had looked at 40 acres of silent Douglas fir sitting on the other side of a fence and concluded it was unclaimed, unused, effectively abandoned. Trees don't make noise. I wasn't there most of the year. The farm had no signage on the eastern side because it didn't need any. It had surveyed boundary lines, county records, and a property tax bill that arrived in my name every January without fail. They assumed silence was vacancy. They assumed vacancy was opportunity. A special board session was called, 3 members, present, no quorum notice distributed to the community, no survey of the adjacent parcel conducted, no attorney consulted about whether this was legal. The vote to proceed with construction was 3-0. 93 homeowners, the other residents of Maplewood Estates, the people whose dues were about to fund this project, were never told it was happening. I had the deed in a fireproof box in my office. I had the county parcel records. I had the original plat map with the surveyed boundary between Maplewood Estates and county parcel number 1147-B drawn in clean black ink. I had never needed any of it before. I was beginning to think I would need all of it now. The morning, I made 2 phone calls before 8 o'clock. The first one was to my attorney, David Mercer. I described what I had seen Saturday. The 3 structures, the families, the banner, the board member with the camera, Karen's consent theory. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Give me 24 hours. The second call was to Jake Polson at Jake's Timber Services. Jake had been logging my timber for 11 years. We had a signed contract for the October harvest. Lots 7 and 9, start date October 14th. A contract value of $178,000 that represented 11 years of Douglas fir growth on those 2 lots. I'd signed the contract in April. Jake's crew had it on their schedule. It was not a flexible date. Jake ran a tight regional operation, and after my window closed on October 21st, his equipment moved to the Henderson contract 2 counties over. I told him there were structures in Lot 7's clearing, 3 of them built without my knowledge or authorization. Jake went quiet for a moment. How big? Full cabin construction. Roofed, walled, furnished. Families using them. Another pause. You want me to note it in the project file? Yes, I said. Note that I've notified you. Note the date and note that the October 14th schedule stands. He noted it. We hung up. I poured a second cup of coffee and waited for David to call back. David's letter went out to the HOA board on Tuesday. Formal measured the kind of legal correspondence that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. It cited county parcel number 1147-B by number. It referenced the deed, the county's commercial agricultural classification, and the surveyed boundary. It made 3 requests. Remove all structures from the parcel. Provide any legal documentation supporting a claimed interest in the property, and cease all HOA activity on privately titled commercial land. Failure to do so, the letter noted, would result in a formal trespass claim. It was not aggressive. It was simply factual. I don't know exactly what happened in the room when Karen read it. What I do know is that the board called an emergency session within 48 hours, and that whatever attorney Karen consulted in the weeks that followed was not consulted before that session, because the decision she made in that room had no legal reasoning behind it that I could ever find. She decided the constructive consent theory was solid. The idea, and I want to be precise here so you understand what she actually believed, was that because I hadn't explicitly rejected the HOA's registered letters in writing, my silence constituted legal acceptance of their community enhancement project. Under her reading of the HOA's own CC&Rs, nobody had checked whether the CC&Rs said anything of the sort. Nobody had checked whether the CC&Rs applied to land outside the subdivision's recorded boundaries. Nobody had asked whether a homeowners association could legally claim interest in a private parcel it didn't own, hadn't purchased, and had no recorded easement over. Karen had a theory. She was confident in it. That was apparently enough. 3 days after David's letter was received, I got my response from the HOA. Not a counteroffer, not a legal argument, not documentation of any claimed interest in the land. A bill, a formal HOA document titled Community Infrastructure Assessment Adjacent Natural Land Enhancement Project, itemizing my proportional share of the construction costs for 3 cabin structures built on county parcel number 1147-B. The total $4,200. They had built on my land without my permission. They were now billing me for the construction. I read it once, read it a second time more slowly to make sure I hadn't misunderstood the math. Then I opened the drawer where I kept the number 1147-B folder and placed it on top of the deed, the plat map, and the county parcel records. I did not write a check. The same week, Karen posted on the neighborhood next door page. I saw it because a neighbor forwarded it to me without comment. Our community retreat space is under threat from a neighbor who wants to bring logging equipment through our natural areas. The board is fighting hard to protect the quality of life this community deserves. If you care about green space and family-friendly environments in Maplewood Estates, please reach out to show your support. She had attached 3 photographs: families at the cabins, children near the tree line. The banner in the background, blue and white, bright in afternoon light. The post received 47 comments inside of 12 hours, most of them supportive. None of them mentioned that the land in the photographs belonged to a private individual who had not been consulted, compensated, or informed before a single board was nailed. I didn't comment. There was nothing to say on Nextdoor that would matter. I added the post screenshotted timestamp to the number 1147-B folder. 4 days after David's letter went out, something arrived at my mailbox. Not from Karen, not from the HOA from a county courthouse. The HOA had filed something official. I stood at the end of my driveway and read the top line twice. I went inside and called David. David called me back the morning after I forwarded the courthouse document to him. "I've seen it," he said. "I'll explain everything when I have the full picture. In the meantime, let me pull the county records on your parcel. The complete title, history, everything on file." I told him to pull whatever he needed. I had the originals at home, but I wanted a fresh retrieval directly from the county clean official dated that week. The kind of document that carries weight in a room where someone is disputing your ownership of something you've paid taxes on for 18 years. He called back the following afternoon. "County parcel 1147-B, he said, titled in your name since 2006. 0 liens, 0 encumbrances, 0 easements, no recorded covenant, no HOA attachment, no shared interest of any kind." He paused. "The county classification is agricultural commercial, not residential, not common space, not in any way associated with Maplewood Estate subdivision. I already knew that. I had known it since the day I signed the deed. But knowing something and having a county official document confirming it in writing are two different things." The document went into the number 1147-B folder on top of the bill. David had also obtained a copy of the HOA's CC and RS, the governing document Karen had been running Maplewood Estates under for 5 years. He walked me through the jurisdiction clause over the phone. I want to give you the plain version of what it said because it matters. The CC and RS explicitly limited HOA authority to the 96 residential lots within the recorded boundaries of Maplewood Estates subdivision. That was the language word for word. No adjacent parcels, no underdeveloped natural land, no provision for community enhancement projects on privately titled property outside the subdivision's recorded boundary line. Karen's entire legal theory, the one she had staked $4,200 in build assessments on the one she had presented to the board with enough confidence that 3 people voted yes, had no foundation in her own governing documents, not one line. The CC and RS went into the folder. I closed it and put it back in the drawer. 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, someone knocked on my front door. She was in her early 70s, white hair, a canvas tote bag over one shoulder. The kind of steady-eyed calm that comes from spending decades in a classroom managing other people's children. She introduced herself as Margaret, 14 years at Maplewood Estates, she said, though. She said it the way people say something when they're no longer sure they're proud of it. She had heard about the cabins from her grandson, who had been one of the children running between them that Saturday. She had then heard about my attorney's letter from a neighbor who knew Karen. She had come to my door, she said, because she had pulled something from the HOA's records and thought I should see it. She handed me a printed document from her tote bag. Margaret had requested the board meeting minutes under the state's HOA open records provision, a clause that required the board to make meeting records available to any member upon written request. She had submitted the request the week the Nextdoor post went up. The minutes had arrived in her inbox 4 days later. I read through them at my kitchen table while Margaret sat across from me with her hands folded. The special session. 3 board members present: Karen, the treasurer, and 1 other. No quorum notice had been distributed to the community before the session was called. The agenda had not been shared with homeowners in advance. The vote to proceed with the Community Enhancement Project 3-0 appeared in the minutes as a 2-line entry between a discussion of pool maintenance costs and a note about street lamp replacement. No survey of the adjacent property had been conducted before the vote. No legal review had been commissioned. No member of the 96-home community had been informed that their dues were about to fund construction on land the HOA did not own. I've lived there 14 years. Margaret said, "I've never missed a board meeting that was properly noticed. I never received notice of this one." I asked if she would be willing to say that in writing. She said she already had. She pulled the second document from the tote bag, a signed, dated personal statement describing what she had found when she had found it and the process she had used to obtain the minutes. She slid it across the table. I added it to the folder. Before she left, Margaret mentioned something else. 2 other residents had contacted her after the next doorpost, not to support Karen's framing, but because they were frightened and confused. One of them was a woman who had been fined by the board 3 years ago over a holiday decoration that remained up 11 days past the allowed seasonal period. The fine had been $1,800. She had paid it rather than fight. The second was a man who had received a lien threat over a fence panel that Karen had deemed non-compliant with HOA standards, a fence panel that had been installed by the previous owner before he moved in. Neither of them would speak publicly. Karen had a long memory, and the board still controlled the fine structure, but both had told Margaret the same thing independently. The board had been acting without community knowledge for years. The community retreat project was not an anomaly. It was a pattern. I thanked Margaret at the door. She nodded once, adjusted the tote bag on her shoulder, and walked back down the driveway toward the road. A manila envelope from Jake's Timber Services arrived in my mailbox the following day. Written confirmation of the harvest schedule. Jake's Timber Services, County Parcel Number 1-147-B, Lots 7 and 9. Start date October 14th. Contract value $178,000. Window closing October 21st. Signed, dated on company letterhead. I filed it in the number 147-B folder without comment. The folder was getting thick. None of it had gone to Karen yet. None of it had gone to anyone except David. I was not in a hurry. The courthouse document from Scene 3 was a temporary restraining order application. David read it to me over the phone slowly. The way he read things, he wanted me to hear correctly the first time. The official title: Motion to Preserve Community Enhancement Structures from Willful Destruction by Property Owner and Commercial Contractors. The respondents named myself by full legal name and Jake's Timber Services by business registration. The hearing date: September 28th, 16 days before October 14th. I sat down. A temporary restraining order, in plain terms, is a court order that stops someone from doing something while a judge decides whether they should be allowed to do it at all. If a judge granted a temporary hold on my harvest, pending the September 28th hearing, and the hearing ran long or was continued or produced any outcome other than an immediate full dismissal, the October 21st window would close. Jake's crew would move to the Henderson contract. 11 years of Douglas fir on lots 7 and 9 would sit in the ground until I could renegotiate a new contract with a logging company willing to take on a disputed parcel. That was not a paperwork problem. That was $178,000 and 11 years of work sitting in legal limbo, because a HOA board president had decided my silence was a deed transfer. I let David finish reading before I said anything. "What are our chances of a temporary hold being granted?" I asked low. He said, "But not zero. A judge can grant a TTRO without hearing both sides if the moving party shows potential irreparable harm. Karen's attorney is going to argue that logging equipment rolling into those cabins constitutes irreparable harm to community property. It's not community property. We know that. The judge will know that by September 28th. The question is, what happens in the 2 weeks between now and then?" I asked him to read me the specific language from the filing. He found the paragraph and read it. HOA's attorney had described the structures as, and I want you to hear this exactly, cabins built by Maplewood Estates, HOA in good faith on adjacent natural land as part of a community enhancement initiative. David stopped reading. I waited. They just documented their own trespass. He said in a signed legal filing their attorney put in, writing under his signature, that the HOA built structures on land that is not theirs. File that. I said it's already filed. That's the problem. It's in the court record, which means it's also our Exhibit B the moment we walk into that courtroom. The same day the TTRO landed on my kitchen table, Karen sent a mass email to all 96 Maplewood Estates homeowners. I received a forwarded copy from Margaret within the hour. Dear Maplewood Estates community, it is with deep concern that I write to you today. A corporate logging operation has filed legal opposition to our community retreat space and is threatening to bring heavy industrial equipment into our neighborhood's natural areas. Your HOA board is committed to fighting for the quality of life, green space, and family-friendly environment that defines our community. We will not back down. We are fighting for you. She had attached 4 photographs: families at the cabins, children at the treine. The blue and white banner in afternoon light a wide shot of the clearing that made 40 acres of commercial timberland look like a community nature preserve. She had not mentioned county parcel number 1147-B. She had not mentioned the deed. She had not mentioned that the corporate logging operation was a single retired man who had owned the land for 18 years and had a signed contract with a logging company he'd worked with for 11. She had not mentioned that the HOA had built 3 structures on that land without authorization, without survey, without legal review, and had then billed the landowner $4,200 for the construction. The framing was deliberate and it was effective. Community versus corporation, green space versus industrial equipment, families versus a man who wanted to cut down their trees. Oh, I read it twice. Added the forwarded copy to the folder time-stamped. Jake texted me that afternoon. Heard about the injunction from my attorney. Wanted you to know where things stand. Our window holds until October 21st. After that, we move to the Henderson contract. Equipment and crew committed. If your situation gets resolved before then, we're still on for the 14th. Just can't hold past the 21st. Let me know. 7 days of grace beyond October 14th. If the September 28th hearing produced anything other than a clean dismissal, a continuation, a partial order, a procedural delay, the window would close. 7 days, I texted back. Understood. October 14th is still the plan. I put the phone down and looked at the calendar on the wall. September 28th circled in the blue pen I'd been using since April when I first scheduled it as a pre-Harvest prep reminder. It meant something different now. David came by the house that evening. We sat at the kitchen table with the number 1147-B folder open between us. He went through the TTRO application page by page, flagging what he called their structural problems, the absence of any legal instrument establishing HOA interest in the parcel, the self-incriminating language about good faith construction on adjacent land, the jurisdiction clause from their own CCNRs that would directly contradict every claim in the filing. This doesn't have merit, he said. But merit isn't the only thing that matters before a hearing. Timing matters. September 28th, I said. September 28th, he said, we go in there, we put the deed in front of the judge, we let their own filing do half our work, and we walk out with a clean dismissal before noon. He paused. That's the plan. I want you to understand there's a version where something procedural delays it. I understand that. What do you want to do? I looked at the folder. 18 years of clean title CC and RS that didn't cover a single square foot of my land. Board minutes from a 3-person session that shouldn't have been called. Margaret's signed statement. Jake's written schedule confirmation. The $4,200 assessment bill that was in its own way an admission that they knew they had built on someone else's property and intended to make that person pay for it. I pushed the folder across the table toward him. Everything they need to lose in that courtroom is already in there, I said. David picked it up, held it, nodded once. The hearing was September 28th. Karen was walking into a courtroom where my deed would be Exhibit A, her attorney's own filing would be Exhibit B, and the HOA, CC, and RS she had apparently never read all the way through would be Exhibit C. I had 16 days to wait. Waiting by that point was something I had gotten very good at. September 28th was a clear morning, cool enough for a jacket. I drove to the county courthouse alone, arrived 40 minutes early, and sat in the parking lot with a coffee until David pulled in beside me at 8:15. We walked in together without saying much. There wasn't much to say. Karen was already inside. She had come prepared for a different kind of event. 4 board members flanked her in the gallery, all of them dressed like they were attending a community award ceremony. Her attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, had a leather portfolio and a rolling file cart with a mounted tablet on top. A slideshow was loaded and ready. I could see the first frame from across the room, a wide shot of the 3 cabins in the morning light, families in the foreground. Douglas fir behind them, the kind of photograph that makes commercial timberland look like a community nature preserve. She had also brought a petition printed bound cover page reading Maplewood Estates community in support of our retreat space. 412 signatures, she would say later. More than 4 times the number of people who had voted in the last HOA board election. I sat down beside David, put my coffee under the bench and looked at the folder in his hands. One page inside it was doing most of the work. Fitch opened for the HOA. He was composed, well-practiced, the kind of attorney who understood that a courtroom is a room full of human beings before it is a room full of law. He did not lead with the deed dispute. He led with the community. He described the retreat space in the language of neighborhood identity, green space, family use, children, the aesthetic and recreational value of natural areas and residential communities. He used the word stewardship twice. He presented the photographs projected on a screen to the judges, left large and well-lit families at the cabins, kids running in the grass, the banner catching afternoon light. Then the petition. 412 signatures from Maplewood Estates residents. He said in support of preserving the community retreat space from what he described as imminent destruction by commercial logging equipment. He argued constructive consent, the 2 registered letters, the absence of explicit written rejection, the board's good faith reliance on that silence. He argued irreparable harm once logging equipment moved through that clearing. The structures could not be undemolished. He argued that the community's investment in the space, made in good faith, deserved the court's protection, while the underlying property question was resolved through proper channels. He was persuasive. I want to be honest about that. If you had walked into that courtroom knowing nothing about county parcel number 1147-B, knowing nothing about the deed or the CC and RS or the 3-person session with no quorum notice, you might have found yourself sympathizing with the families in those photographs. That was exactly what the photographs were designed to make you do. No one on their side had mentioned the county parcel number once, Karen testified briefly. She was calm in the way that people are calm when they have convinced themselves that confidence and authority are the same thing. She walked through the process in a measured voice. Letters sent, silence received, board vote taken. Construction completed. Community enhancement, member benefit. Due process followed. We acted in good faith for the community. She said everything we did was for the families of Maplewood Estates. She stepped down. Fitch nodded once. Their presentation was finished. The gallery was quiet in the way galleries get when the room believes one side has made its case. David stood up. He didn't use the projector. He didn't bring a petition. He walked to the front of the room, opened the folder, and placed a single document on the plaintiff's table where the judge could see it. Your Honor, he said, my client has held unencumbered title to county parcel number 1147-B since 2006. This is the deed retrieved directly from county records showing his name, the date of acquisition, and 0 encumbrances of any kind. No liens, no easements, no HOA attachments, no recorded covenant connecting this parcel to Maplewood Estate subdivision in any legal instrument. 1 page, 1 paragraph of county language, my name at the top. The respondent is a commercial timber farmer conducting a lawful harvest operation on land he has owned for 18 years. The structures in question were built on his land without his authorization, without any survey of the parcel, and without any legal instrument establishing HOA, interest in, or jurisdiction over this specific property. He sat down. The judge looked at the deed. She was quiet for a moment, then she looked at Fitch. Counsel. She said, Your client is requesting this court restrain a titled property owner from conducting lawful commercial activity on land he has held for 18 years. She set the deed down on her desk. Can you show me any legal instrument, a deed, an easement, a recorded covenant, or any other document filed with this county granting your client authority over county parcel number 1147-B? Fitch began to answer. He mentioned the registered letters. He began to reference the CC and RS. The judge held up one hand. Not the letters, she said. Not the CC and RS's. A legal instrument granting your client jurisdiction over this specific parcel, filed with the county recorded. The room went very still. Fitch opened his portfolio. He turned 2 pages turned back. He opened the side pocket of the file cart. He looked at the tablet screen, then away from it. He turned to his associate, a younger man seated behind him, who opened a laptop and began scrolling with the focus speed of someone who already knew what they weren't going to find. Fitch turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess. I looked at my watch. I don't know why exactly. Some version of the same instinct that had made me check it on the ridge that Saturday morning. Standing in front of 3 cabins on my own land, the attorney shuffled papers for 47 seconds. I counted. When court resumed, Karen was looking at the floor. Court resumed at 10:43. Fitch stood up before the judge could speak. He straightened his portfolio on the table, looked once at his associate, and turned to face the bench. Your Honor, he said, the HOA voluntarily withdraws its application for a temporary restraining order. He framed it as a procedural decision, a matter of timing. He used language that made it sound like a strategic choice rather than a collapse at this juncture in the interest of allowing the underlying property question to proceed through appropriate channels, the kind of language attorneys use when they need a retreat to sound like a maneuver. The gallery murmured quietly at first, then louder. The judge let the murmur run for 3 seconds. Then she set down her pen. I appreciate the withdrawal, counsel, she said. However, this court has reviewed the documentation presented this morning and intends to address the record. Fitch sat down slowly. She spoke without notes. That was the thing I noticed. Everything she said came from what she had read and what Fitch had failed to produce in 47 seconds of silence. The deed to county parcel number 1147-B is unambiguous. She said the respondent has held unencumbered title to this parcel since 2006. The county records reflect 0 liens, 0 easements, and 0 recorded instruments connecting this parcel to Maplewood Estate subdivision in any legal capacity. She picked up a second document from her desk, the CC and RS. David had submitted them as part of our response filing the previous week. This court has also reviewed the HOA's own governing documents. The jurisdiction clause explicitly limits HOA authority to the 96 residential lots within the recorded boundaries of Maplewood Estate subdivision. There is no language, none extending HOA authority to adjacent private parcels. She set the CC and RS down. The temporary restraining order is denied with prejudice. 3 words, the gallery went still, in the way that rooms go still when something final has been said. She wasn't finished. This court further notes for the record that structures constructed on privately titled commercial land without the owner's authorization and without any recorded legal instrument constitute trespass under state property law. The constructing party is hereby ordered to remove all structures from county parcel number 1147-B within 30 days at the constructing party's sole expense. She looked at Fitch. Is that understood, counsel? Fitch said yes. The word came out smaller than he intended. David stood up one final time, not to argue. The argument was over. He stood up because there was one thing left to do. He reached into the folder, took out Exhibit A and held it up so the room could see it. 1-page county letter had my name at the top, date of acquisition 2006. Your Honor, he said, my client has held unencumbered title to this parcel for 18 years. He has conducted lawful commercial timber operations on this land through every one of those years. There was never any legal ambiguity about who owned county parcel number 147-B. He set the deed on the table. There still isn't. He sat down. The deed sat on the table in front of us, 1 page, the only document that had ever mattered. The slideshow on the HOA's projector was still running. Nobody had turned it off. Families at the cabin's children near the tree and the banner in afternoon light. It cycled through the same 4 photographs on a loop, while the judge gathered her papers and the gallery began to breathe again. Karen leaned toward Fitch and said something I couldn't hear. He shook his head once slowly, the way people shake their heads when they are done explaining something they should have explained 6 weeks earlier. She sat back. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. Still, too still. Margaret was seated 4 rows back in the gallery. I hadn't known she was there until I turned around. She was looking not at Karen, not at the judge, but at the HOA treasurer, a man named Dennis who was seated 3 chairs to her right and had been on the board for 3 years. "Excuse me," Margaret said, not loudly, but in a quiet room clearly. "Dennis, how much of our dues funded this lawsuit?" Dennis looked at the floor. He did not answer. The woman seated directly behind him. I would learn her name later, the one who had paid the $1,800 holiday decoration fine 3 years ago and never fought, it said in a voice that carried to the front of the room without effort. $22,000. She spent $22,000 of our money on a property we didn't own. No one corrected her. No one disputed the number. Fitch was writing something on a legal pad and not looking up. 2 board members who had been seated together in the second row exchanged a look. The kind of look that means we did not sign up for this. One of them put his phone in his pocket without checking it. The other gathered his jacket from the back of his chair. Karen stood to leave. The man in the aisle, the one who had received the lien threat over the fence panel installed by the previous owner, the one who had never publicly said a single word against the board, was standing in her path. He didn't move immediately. He looked at her for a moment in the particular way that people look at someone who has held power over them when the power is gone. Then he stepped aside. She walked out without looking back. I stayed in my seat until the gallery had mostly cleared. David collected the folder. The deed went back inside it. Exhibit a return to the number 1147-B folder, where it had lived for 18 years without ever needing to be anything other than what it was. I walked out into the courthouse hallway, found a quiet corner near the water fountain, and called Jake. "The injunction's been withdrawn," I said. TRO denied with prejudice. The structures are ordered off the property within 30 days. A pause. "So we're clear." "We're clear." "October 14th is confirmed. We'll be there," Jake said. I put the phone in my pocket and stood there for a moment in the hallway. Through the tall courthouse windows, the sky was the flat pale blue of late September. Clear, no clouds, the kind of morning that makes timber country look like it goes on forever. The HOA hired a removal company within 72 hours. 3 cabins, walls, roofs, fermentation propane lines, all of it disassembled and hauled out in 2 days of work that cost the HOA $8,400 in labor and transport. I know this because the invoice later became part of the financial accounting that the new board conducted after Karen resigned. The members-only banner came down first. I wasn't there when they took it down, but I was told it was the first thing to go unclipped from the center cabin before the crew even started on the walls. Blue letters on white vinyl. Someone folded it and put it in the back of a truck and drove it away. The clearing was empty by the end of October 2nd, 12 days before the harvest. The county building inspector came out to the property on October 3rd. The cabins were already gone, by then the clearing on Lot 7 empty. Nothing left but the rectangular outlines in the grass where the foundations had sat. The inspector walked the lots with a clipboard anyway, photographed the ground, measured the footprint dimensions against the removal contractor's invoice, and filed his report the following morning. 3 unpermitted structures built on privately titled commercial land without survey, without county approval, without any recorded authorization. The county fines totaled $6,500. The citations were filed under 3 names: Karen, the HOA treasurer Dennis, and the 3rd board member from the special session. County parcel number 1147-B lot 7 lot 9. The same lot numbers that had been on my deed since 2006. David sent me the full accounting in a single email about 2 weeks after the courthouse ruling. I printed it and read it at the kitchen table with my morning coffee. The way I read anything I want to understand completely before I file it away. The HOA's total loss from one board decision made by 3 people in a special session that 93 homeowners never knew was happening. $22,000 in legal fees to Fitch and his firm, $8,400 in cabin removal and transport, $6,500 in county fines, the $4,200 assessment check that had been mailed back to me without a cover letter. The week after the hearing, voided and reissued in my name, $41,100 gone from the community dues account in the span of 4 months. The HOA's own insurance carrier had opened a review of Karen's personal liability in connection with the unauthorized construction. That process was ongoing. I didn't follow it closely. It wasn't my concern. I folded the accounting sheet and put it in the number 1147-B folder. Then I closed the folder and put it back in the drawer. I didn't think I would need to open it again. The community meeting was held on October 9th. The first properly noticed, fully opened community meeting Maplewood Estates had held in 5 years. Agenda distributed in advance, all 96 homeowners invited. Minutes to be made available upon request. Karen resigned before it started. She submitted a written resignation to the board at 9 in the morning and did not attend the meeting. The other 2 board members from the special session, Dennis and the third, submitted their resignations the same day within an hour of each other. The community elected a new board that evening. Margaret was appointed secretary. She told me about it afterward over the phone, in the same matter-of-fact tone she'd used when she'd handed me the board minutes at my kitchen table 2 months earlier. She said she hadn't planned to take a position. She said the room had asked her to, and she hadn't been able to think of a reason to say no. I told her she'd earned it. 3 days after the new board was seated, a letter arrived at my mailbox. Hey. Letterhead. A formal written apology acknowledging that Maplewood Estates HOA had constructed structures on county parcel number 1147-B without authorization, without legal basis, and without the knowledge or consent of the property owner. It stated that the board recognized the error, accepted full responsibility, and committed to ensuring no future board action would extend beyond the recorded boundaries of the subdivision. It was signed by all 5 new board members. Margaret's signature was at the bottom. I read it once, set it on the kitchen counter, made myself another cup of coffee. The $4,200 check had arrived the week before. A plain white envelope, no cover letter, just the voided assessment and a reissued check in my name. I'd left it on the kitchen table for a few days without depositing it. Not out of principle, just because I kept walking past it and not needing to do anything about it yet. One morning I picked it up, looked at it for a moment, and put it in my desk drawer. That was enough. October 14th came in cold and clear, the way the best harvest mornings do in this part of the country. The sky still dark when I drove out, the tree line just starting to show against the gray when I came over the ridge. Jake's trucks were already at the gate, 3 of them idling, low headlights cutting through the pre-dawn. Jake himself was standing beside the lead truck with a thermos, going over the day's plan with his crew chief. He raised a hand when he saw me coming down the slope. I stood on the ridge above lots 7 and 9 and looked at the clearing where 3 finished cabin structures had stood 10 weeks before. The ground was empty. Not a board, not a post, not a length of propane line. The grass had already started to recover from the foundation impressions, filling in from the edges the way grass does when given enough time and left alone. The ground was clear the way it was always supposed to be. I watched Jake's first crew move in below me. The sounds of a harvest morning, starting up engines, equipment voices, carrying in the cold air. The same sounds I'd been hearing on this ridge for 18 years. Nothing had changed. That was the thing that settled over me standing there, heavier and quieter than anything I expected to feel. Nothing had changed. I still owned the land. The deed still said what it had always said. The trees were ready. The contract was honored. The schedule had held. Somewhere in the county courthouse, a trespass citation with Maplewood Estates HOA printed across the top was sitting in a file. Lot 7, Lot 9. My name on the deed, their name on the citation. It had always been my land. On October 14th, the trees finally came down to prove.